Inaugural Impact Investing Forum at University of Oregon. I know that you've all seen the weather outside, so I'm really happy that you're all here today. I'm Ryan Cavinte. I teach and manage in the Center for Sustainable Business Practices at the Lundquist College of Business, but I am also the faculty advisor for the Graduate Net Impact chapter, who's your host here today. Net Impact is an organization that started in 1993 at Yale University as Students for Socially Responsible Business. And since then, it's grown to 100,000 members, hundreds of student and professional chapters all around the world. We have 2 chapters here at U of O, an undergraduate chapter and also a graduate chapter. And all of those people are dedicated to better sustainability outcomes through the tools of business. So for those of you who are students, if that sounds interesting to you, please do join those clubs, either the undergraduate or the graduate institutions. And the way you can tell is most of them have a lanyard and they look like a student. We are running today's program in partnership with Oregon Advanced Strategy and Leadership, which is a program in the MBA program that combines sustainability, leadership, and innovation to create strategists that can take on some of our hardest challenges. And so we're really happy to have students from that program and the support of Scott Kerslake and Michael Crook, who run that program. Another thing I'm supposed to do is to acknowledge our sponsors. So I just want to let you know that Tiedemann Advisors, Wavy, Wayward Spirit, Greg Hauser, the Cameron Center for Financial Securities Analysis, More Career Services, and the Center for Sustainable Business Practices, all are sponsors of this event. As you can probably tell, Net Impact tries to do things through a network mode, so if you can, if you would, please give them a big round of applause to you. Thank you. One last acknowledgement I wanted to make is that even though I'm the faculty advisor of the Net Impact chapter, I didn't really raise a finger for this event, so I do want to make sure that we acknowledge the leadership of the graduate chapters, President Sarah Brinker, Sam Holland, Jordan Franklin, and the event lead, Brett McDonald. So I'd love for them to have a big round of applause. Just to go through the run of show, I'm sure you all are familiar, but we will have 2 panels today. The first will be on the topic of wealth accumulation in North America and opportunities for mission-driven investing in regenerative ag, renewable energy, and other things. Once your heads are done exploding from that, we will take a stretch break. And then we'll move into the second panel, which will be impact investing across diverse asset classes. At the end of that, then and only then will we be announcing the winners of the $100 Visa gift cards. And then we hope you will all join us for a reception in the back where we'll have hors d'oeuvres and an opportunity to meet all of our panelists. So please stay for that. One last thing as we get ready to bring the panelists up. I know there's a lot of undergrad students, graduate students, faculty, community members, and we thought it might be good just to give a definition of impact investing before we started, so you can ponder that as our panelists are coming up. Impact investing, or impact investments, are investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable, social or environmental value alongside financial returns. That comes from the Global Impact Investing Network. You don't have to believe that that's actually what's happening. You can believe it's aspirational. You can believe that that definition should change, but it is definitely something that's going on in the world and people are really interested in it. So this forum is intended to bring that conversation here to U of O and to gather us all together to see if we can be part of it and see where we fit into that world. So with that thought, let's bring our first panel up, led by our graduate chapter president, Sarah Brinker, and our special guests, Esther Park and Joel Sullivan.
You guys hear me? Awesome. Okay, thank you all for being here. The turnout is amazing. So excited that you're spending your time here today. Again, I'm Sarah Brinker. I am the president of the Net Impact Graduate Chapter, and I'm a second-year MBA student, graduating in a few weeks. So that's exciting. I'm here with Joel Solomon and Esther Park. We're going to be talking about mass wealth accumulation and ways to deploy that yesterday, basically, as well as into regenerative ag and organics. So it'll be about 45 minutes, and then we'd love Q&A from the audience. So we'll have about 15 minutes for that, and then a little stretch break. So, Joel, Esther, why don't you introduce yourselves, tell us about your companies and your clients, and we'll go from there.
Yeah? Oh, okay. Hi. So my name is Esther Park. I work for Cienega Capital and the No Regrets Initiative. And we are a single-family office with a regenerative asset strategy. So we have 4 entities that we deploy our strategy through. One is the Piscinus Ranch, which is in San Benito County, California. It is a 7,600-acre working ranch where we are demonstrating and proving out regenerative agricultural principles there. Cienega Capital, which I run, is the investment entity. We make private investments in regenerative food and agriculture businesses. And we also have a family foundation, the Globetrotter Foundation. And this year we just incorporated the Piscinus Ranch Learning Center, which is where we run a lot of workshops around holistic management, regenerative ag, and other topics. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
And Esther and I are fortunate enough to be longtime colleagues in this work. I come from an entrepreneurial family in Chattanooga, Tennessee, so I grew up around that. My first professional work, besides some seed capital investing in this, was an opportunity to do something similar to what Esther does with a different visionary woman who inherited a lot of money and wanted the majority to solve problems today and wanted to get it out the door. She remains wealthy, but we deployed a strategy that we call integrated capital. And as a one-woman activist family office, we did for-profit investing in sustainable businesses. We built a charitable foundation that we spent down to amplify the potency in fewer years and left behind a couple of key institutions. This is all based in Vancouver, BC. And we invested in public policy work and politics and in leadership and inner skill development as a holistic strategy focused in our region. After that, we decided to see if people might invest their capital with us in the investment side. So we built a mission venture capital firm, US, Canada, investors from both countries and globally, charitable foundations, boutique wealth managers. And we are now completing our 4th fund, and it will be a couple $1 million under management on that mission venture capital theory is in some other derivative of impact, and the premise that, as the introduction said, you can make money while doing good. Market rate return. And find companies that are doing things that matter and entrepreneurs who actually care.
Excellent, thank you. So before we get into too many intense questions, how do you know each other? And let's learn a little bit about your backgrounds.
So Joel and I met probably about a decade ago, I would guess. We were both kind of running in the same circles. Joel was actually just starting to raise money for their first fund with outside investors. So the very first fund was just with the one investor, and then he was just starting to raise a second fund with outside investors. So that's, I think, when we really first met. And at the time, I was working at a nonprofit in San Francisco called RSF Social Finance, where at that time, we were just starting to do social enterprise lending. That organization typically had only done loans to nonprofits and mostly Waldorf schools at that time. But there was a small group of us internally who really pushed for social enterprise lending as being a mission-based objective for the fund. And so we started investing in mostly organic food and beverage companies. That was really starting to come up back then. That was in 2006. And we were really one of the early financiers of those types of businesses. And then alongside, it was a very nice match actually to what Renewal was doing because they were providing equity to many of those same types of businesses. So that's where we found some common ground.
And we came up through networks that started a few decades ago that were having these discussions. How can money be directed to the living world and aligned with profit making? And there are many different forms, but there's actually decades of this premise that was going on, different language, different names, lots of experimentation, testing. And we were fortunate enough to be exposed to the early networks, entrepreneurs, and thinkers in the field. And I think that it will be fair to say, Esther can decline this if she wants, but that we ended up fortunately in roles that allowed us to fashion ourselves as a bit of disruptors, that we were in positions where we could go further than most institutions could because there were private owners or organizations that would let that happen. So we've been colleagues along with, of course, a growing wave of people now that are experimenting, tinkering, and finding new ways, new dimensions of aligning money with what matters to the future.
Awesome, and Joel, nicely, I think a bunch of you got his book, so you can learn more about that in there as well. So let's get into the investment philosophies, or what are the values and pillars that drive the decisions that your companies make. So why don't we start with yours, Esther?
Sure. So as I said before, we're a single investor fund, so in many ways we can do whatever we want. So we're not sort of beholden to the least common denominator of, say, a dozen different investors. And so my investor, her name is Sally Calhoun, she's a pretty, I would say she's a disruptor. And she's really interested in putting money out in a, I would say, biomimetic way, which means we want money to mimic nature. And so what does nature look like? How can we learn from that? And how can we put money out in a way that, that really acts naturally, I guess you could say. And one of our favorite metaphors for money is water. And so I'm just curious if there's anybody out there who knows what a cienega is, which is what we're named after. Oh, of course you know mine. What is it?
It's it's sort of like a wetland in a way, where water comes in and is stored and slowly sinks down into the ground, but there is salt water, right?
It's not salt water, it's actually fresh water.
Okay, well then it's like a wetland,
right? Right. So the Spanish word ciénaga can be translated for swamp. And most people who know that will say, why would you name your fund Swamp Capital? That seems really weird. But we did it because a ciénaga actually is this particular body of water in the Southwest. It is a wetland, so it's a spring-fed wetland that moves slowly across the landscape, sinks in very deeply, and fosters a very unique perennial landscape. And perennial plant life. And so we really like that as a metaphor for money. That's what we wanted it to do. We wanted it to slow down, to spread out, and to sink in deeply. So that kind of describes our philosophy. And so we reject a lot of the typical frameworks that you might put on money, that most people put on money, which is around risk and return and impact metrics. We reject all of those things because that's kind of the old system way of thinking. We want to think about money in a new way, in a different way. And so we describe our portfolio as a beautiful portfolio. We want it to be beautiful, to be able to sit back and go, oh, this looks amazing, it's so beautiful. And so we're really agnostic, actually, as to the financial return of the portfolio. One of my philosophies that, I crib heavily from a great guy named John Fullerton, who we both know, up in Connecticut, which is to say that financial returns have been escalating, and the financialization of our economy has been escalating at a really rapid rate. But at the same time, what's been happening is our ecological resources have been plummeting, and we have been using up people, and so human resources have also been plummeting. And so this is really not a low-risk state of the world. If you look at what's happening globally with sort of the increasing wealth divide, if you look at what's happened in Syria, all of the climate refugees that are out there in the world. So with, looking just at the financial piece of what we've been doing, we've actually created a high-risk system, a high-risk society that we live in. And so with the investing that we do, our goal is to create less risk in our society by increasing ecological capital, by increasing human capital. And in the process, financial capital might have to actually decrease. We're okay with that, right? Because we need to bring those three things back in alignment. And so just, from the on-the-ground level of what we're doing, we'll make $25,000 loans to an herb farmer for irrigation pipe. And we'll also do, $1 million, $2 million investments in large-scale regenerative agriculture projects. So we invest in a model. We are really bringing forth the capital that is needed in the moment for the right person. So instead of saying, we're just a debt fund and we only do loans that look like this, or we're just an equity fund and we only do investments that look like this, we are able to be flexible across the capital spectrum, even going into the philanthropy, so utilizing grants in different ways. When we see a person or a project that's doing something that's really needed on the land, then we say, okay, how can we best meet the needs of this project or this entrepreneur? And then we sort of pull whatever tool is the most appropriate in that case. So in one case it might be a loan, in one case it might be a mortgage, in another case it might be an equity investment. So we're very open, flexible, and we're really focused on the kinds of outcomes that we want to see on the land.
So I'm in the venture capital business, but there's a reason. And it has to do with much deeper issues. And it's not just to do venture capital and make money for people. We're facing global crisis, ecological crisis, social injustice crisis, and political crisis. Maybe population. Maybe all this is going to be solved by business. I'm not sure of that. Accumulation of money has gotten pretty dramatic. We're missing perhaps the spiritual roots of the meaning of life and what we're doing. How much is enough? How much money is enough money? And then what are we going to do with it? There's a concentration of wealth that's accelerating at an ever more rapid pace. So I think that what the impact investment movement is about at the deeper level is really a social change investing strategy. There's an ecosystem that requires big, major wealth managers to help deploy some of this wealth. You're going to hear more from them in the next panel. They're doing an important piece of it. They're helping people think about their money more and start to have it align with what they care about. But there's an entrepreneurial sector and there's a social activist sector that are all working to deal with these crises that we have created as humans. Money can make a big difference, but it has to be used with consciousness. And we need a point of view that is long-term. We have huge responsibility for the people that are going to come after us. And I don't think we're doing such a good job, even with all the miracles and marvels that we have, because we're leaving behind a lot of people, we're damaging a lot of species, and we're at risk of taking out this Garden of Eden that has gotten us to where we are. So all of this, for me, requires something in addition to how am I going to take care of myself and my family if I'm well educated, connected, and have access to resources, if we're going to leave behind 70% of the rest of the planet and make it unlivable? That's what's really going on here in my point of view. Each of us have different parts of the system we're working in. We may be shoppers that are choosing where to buy and what to buy. We may have money in bank accounts, retirement accounts, insurance policies. We're all dealing with the modern world. We need to pay better attention to what our money has been doing to people and places before it comes to us, and in the ways we get more of it, and then what we do with it. And there are alternatives. And this movement that we're talking about today is creating an ecosystem of alternatives that might look at it as a healing tool and as a future-proofing and insurance tool that future generations will look back on what we did with all this power to make a world that's livable and wonderful. And I think it's all of our responsibility, and we all can find our way into it.
Thank you, Joel. So how does that translate to, nice, okay, to renewal funds? You guys are managing $98 million. What's something we can more grasp onto that you're doing with your investment philosophy?
We're fortunately going to have another $100 million or so from our current fund that's about to complete. So what's good about having that scale? Well, people pay a little bit more attention, and it enables us to invest in more companies, as I said earlier, that are making products and offering services that actually matter by people who truly care for consumers and employees and people that you don't have any contact with who have a big stake in it. That's a responsibility of all of us. Renewal Funds is basically a classic smaller venture capital fund that is taking those premises and just proving, along with a whole lot of other players that are doing this across the landscape, of putting values and money together. Money could indeed be the root of all good, and it should be. Why else would we even have the privilege and the opportunity to have that kind of power to use it? We need to use it well. So Renewal Funds is educating several hundred investors, their families, their friends, their advisors, their communities, through getting exposed to now several dozen companies across organic food, household, non-toxic households, and environmental technologies. Basically, soil and climate, if you generalize what those are. That's what we're working on. And there is an ecosystem of entrepreneurs that care. There is a generation coming up, not all of whom think the same, but many of whom are paying attention to what the future is going to look like and are watching us. And I think that there are future generations that will be studying this period where we reached quite a peak of industrial capability. Renewal is a way to have a platform to show examples and models and have a growing opportunity. And then I wrote a book to help amplify the chance to preach. And so I appreciate having an audience today. Thank you.
Thank you. Esther, I wanted to circle back on what you do at San Diego Capital, and that you don't measure impact, which is interesting for a bunch of MBAs who are talking about frameworks and metrics and management. So can you expand on that philosophy a little bit more?
Sure. For us, we really believe that we really believe in complex systems. We live in a complex world, and we're trying to increase the complexity, actually, of what goes on, particularly in agriculture. And so, if you've ever tried to measure a complex system, that's really difficult, right? It's difficult to boil it down to one number, and often that number doesn't tell you exactly what's going on. Also, those numbers have a context, and oftentimes when you take those numbers out of context, you take them out of context. So I'll give you an example of a time where I was looking at a Native American run and owned business. And I was assessing it through the whole due diligence, and I came back to the investor and I said, this seems like an interesting business, but at the end of the day, because of the type of business it is, this will create maybe 8 jobs on the reservation. Like, that doesn't seem like a lot. So, I don't know what kind of impact you're really going to get out of this company. And they came back and said, are you kidding me? On a reservation that has 80 to 90% unemployment, 8 jobs is huge. And I didn't know that because I didn't understand the context of a Native American reservation. So I was like, oh, okay, I get it. 8 jobs is huge. But if you were a company that was, in downtown Portland creating 8 jobs, like, that would be sort of very middling kind of impact, right? So 8 jobs in downtown Portland, not the same as 8 jobs in a Native American reservation. And so just to lift that number up doesn't really tell you what's actually going on, what that impact is on the ground. And so we really try not to lift up those kinds of metrics. There are some metrics that we look at, but we're not publicizing how many acres of whatever that did we affect, or how many percentage of organic matter, blah blah blah. We're not doing that because the minute that you reduce something down to a single variable, that's when you start to get one-dimensional solutions. Right? One-dimensional assessments require one-dimensional solutions. So, there's a lot of talk about soil sequestering carbon. And so, everyone's like, well, we gotta measure how much carbon is being sequestered in the soil. We have to measure this number and then we have to reward people for that number. But if you focus on the one number like that, you're gonna get solutions that don't actually regenerate the soil. You're gonna get solutions that don't actually help rural communities, that help farmers make a living. Right? You're going to get solutions like, let's dump a 1/4 inch of compost on billions of acres of rangeland around the world. That's what we should do, right? If carbon is what you're going for, that's actually what you should do. And that's not what we want. So we really reject, the idea that we can reduce what we're trying to achieve with our work to some kind of reductionist number.
Okay, our MBAs here take note of that. Nothing simple. So going back to deploying wealth as soon as possible, let's say in 10 years I've done well for myself and philanthropy has started to change a little bit. Should I give it to a nonprofit or should I give it to something that otherwise wouldn't exist if I wasn't going to invest in it, which is also kind of known as additionality?
Yes. Here's the point. There's urgency. There's plenty of money. There's trillions of dollars sloshing around right now. It needs to be used for long-term intelligence and well-being. There are entities and there are some investors that actually are playing long-term games or long-term intentions, but too few are. And we're losing track of that responsibility. It is a basic human responsibility to look out for the future. We've gotten very immediacy focused and very self-focused. We've forgotten about the whole and the larger society. I actually think there's a spiritual crisis as well, which is a loss of direction and sense of what the meaning of life is. Money, then tied to those questions, potential tool. I'm a capitalist. I use money and I invest and I make money. After that, though, there are a whole lot of other values and points of view, political beliefs, all kinds of things that amplify the potency of those tools and of those actions. I think that we need to ask ourselves as individuals first, how much is enough? How much is enough money for us to take care of everything we can imagine taking care of in our own lives? People living, 50% of the people on the planet living on probably what I paid for that drink over there a day. is not a good, that's not a good trend line. It's not going to end well with lots of the rest of us having more and more. So if we can think about what is enough and actually stick to it, generally the best answer people come up with is I'll make a lot of money and then I'll give away some. That's good. Just be sure you give it away. And don't keep moving the bar. And be sure that while you're accumulating money, wealth of any kind, money or other wealth of any kind, that you're considering the community, you're considering the future. Therefore, where are we going to get that kind of thinking societally? Are the universities teaching it? Are the religions teaching it? Are the financial institutions teaching it? There's a big gap that needs everybody here to step in and think about those topics and apply our deepest belief systems to taking care of the whole.
I just think that there's, I've heard people say, yes, I want to go out and make a ton of money, and then I'm going to go and do a ton of philanthropy. Well, I think one of the fallacies in that is like, well, what are you really doing by going out and making a lot of money? What's happening there? What is the cost of you making a lot of money? And what is society coming to when we see this increasing wealth divide? So we're just going to create more wealthy people so that there's more people who are on the have-not end of things, and then we're going to do philanthropy to help them because we didn't pay them enough when we were making all the, tons of money that we're making over here. Like, it just, I think we need to think holistically about what we're doing. When we think about ways that we accumulate and use money. So I saw a press release last week of a foundation, $1.3 billion foundation, and they just made a big announcement that, $50 million they're setting aside for impact investing. This was a press release. It was like, wow, amazing. And I was like, that's 3% maybe of your total assets. So 97% of your assets, you're okay investing in whatever, like anything, like fossil fuels, like stuff that's hurting our society and our environment, and then you're gonna heal that with 3% of your money? That just doesn't make any sense to me, right? And that's a philanthropy. Those are all philanthropic dollars. Those should all be invested for impact.
I just want to emphasize this point that particularly community foundations, universities, churches, big charities are investing their money every day creating the problems that they're trying to solve with the bits of earnings from that. That is a difficult, contradictory conundrum to live with, and it will eventually crack. So what else? I like ambition and motivation. Billionaire always sounded like an exciting word, and what does it mean to be a billionaire and what could I do? What I came to was, let's just put something different than dollars with vast accomplishment. How about billionaire of good deeds? How about a billionaire of caring? Let's use our power and our resources to be the very best possible humans. That's something to think about on your deathbed and feel proud of, and to pass on to future generations to feel proud of us.
Thank you. Lovely. Well, let's change up the tempo here a little bit and just do a quick popcorn round before some final questions. So I'd like to know, what do each of you do on a regular basis to reduce your footprint?
Fly to Eugene.
We're offsetting that for you, don't worry.
A double offset, is that? There are a lot of serious contradictions and conundrums that we're having to live with, and I think that there's all kinds of rationalizations we each make. Mine are something like, the people that are deciding to stop flying and stop using a lot of things are often people that are dedicating themselves to the best work. And so we have a lot of contradictions in this thing we've created called humanity and society right now. So really, I think that all I really want to claim about that, I mean, I do the things that are easy to do, like probably many of us, but it is being in effectively a movement for a spiritual evolution that will look at this whole system differently. And and be a political citizen and care about what happens there and try to take responsibility in society in every way that I can. I would rather work at that level. I thought my early life, I went away and I didn't consume. I only foraged and went to the free store in my younger years to attempt to deal with this dilemma. And I basically took myself out from being able to contribute to anything. So I don't know the answer to this. Tell me what spiritual leader can give me that answer.
So yeah, we've been pretty heavy in our comments, so I think this is meant to be lighthearted. So so on a daily basis, I think it's what I don't do, which is I don't take care of my yard. And it's actually pretty intentional because, sometimes my husband will be like, oh my God, what's going on out there? It's like a jungle, I need to pull these weeds, and he'll go out and start pulling weeds, and then I'll come out and yell at him and say like, don't do that! We need living roots in the soil to create, connections with the microbes, and so I start lecturing him about this kind of thing, and he's like, okay, I'm not even gonna deal with it, and our neighbors probably are starting to hate us because it's looking kind of unruly, but I kind of do it because I want to keep the soil covered, and I want to keep living roots in the ground as long as possible. And I don't have that big of a yard, but that's my little contribution.
I didn't procreate, but I married a woman with 4 children. I didn't want to have a pet. We finally got a pet, and I'm smitten. And the only thing I can rationalize is having this much love and joy in my life has helped me deal with all the gloom I like to talk about.
Thank you for saying something other than recycling. I appreciate that. Cool. So, since we have the Oregon Advanced Strategy and Leadership as one of our partners, I'd love to know as well, what leader do you really look up to in impact investing or beyond?
Well, one of my favorites is Vandana Shiva, who is an environmental activist, and she's, for those of us who are in food, she's kind of a big hero. And she's done so much to really organize against GMOs, against uses of pesticide and herbicides in agriculture. She is based in India, so a lot of her achievement has been there, but she's an amazing speaker. And the one thing that she says that my principal also says is that the sooner women take over, the sooner we're going to fix this.
I have to also go, I got to go bigger than a person, which will tie into this, which is we need to re-feminize, re-inclusivize, and re-indigenize the entire economy. If you think through what I just meant by that, we have to think holistically and long term. That's what I admire, are all the people who are attempting to do that and committing our lives to it.
Thank you. So getting back to impact investing, a little bit deeper and more tangible, I'd love to hear
4.2.
I'd love to learn specifically about some of the impact investing projects you're working on, like in Oregon, and then some of the specific work you've done with renewal funds.
Yeah, so it was kind of fun for me to come out here to Eugene because we do have a few projects here in Oregon, and every time I come here, I meet some really amazing people. Like, Oregon, you guys got it going on. So we have 2 investments in Oregon that are kind of linked, and they're kind of linked in a fun way. So one of them is a distillery, so they make gin and whiskey, and then the other one is a cattle ranch. So you might wonder, what's the connection there? So we invested in Carmen Ranch, which some of you may know. Carmen Ranch makes grass-fed beef. And they are what we call a regional aggregator. So they run their own cattle, but they also source from maybe half a dozen other cattle ranchers up there in the Wallowa Valley where they're based. And so a lot of their grass-fed beef comes into the Portland metro area. And they're doing some distribution beyond that too. But we invested in that because grass-fed beef is a really hard business. Like, our meat industry has just been so consolidated to the point where it's really choked out the possibility for a lot of small producers out there. So she's really trying to figure out, like, what's the model that can really be profitable and make money. And the connection between these two is that the two of them were having drinks one day, and one of them said, you know, I'd really love to make whiskey. And the other one said, hey, if you make whiskey, I'll grow the grain for it. And so the cattle rancher, what she's doing is, in her rotations with the cattle, she's growing small grains, because that's actually really good for soil health, to grow small grains in rotation with your cattle. And so she's growing the grains that are required to make the gin and the whiskey. So we invested in both companies, and they have this really nice symbiotic relationship to each other. And one of the things that we always say at the No Regrets Initiative is we are going to drink our way out of this problem. And so firmly believing that, we invested in the distillery. You should also know that at our ranch we have planted a grazing vineyard. So we're hoping to also drink wine. And we are also planting lots of grains where the sheep graze. And so hopefully if one of you enterprising folks out there want to make beer from the grains that we grow on the ranch, you are most welcome to come in and start that business.
Look at the portfolio under renewalfunds.com, but I'll give you a little scan. On the food side, plant-based products, fair trade organic products, innovations that actually increase and the positive impacts on environmental footprint and human health. On the environmental technology side, we range from traffic control systems to reduce emissions, species protection with tracking mechanisms for environmental assessments and understanding species better, from minnows to rhinoceros. Fiberglass windows and doors that are vastly more insulating and heat retaining than vinyl or aluminum for windows and doors. And food traceability, so that when there is a food incident, we, instead of shutting down the entire region of a food chain, they will know which farm and possibly, depending on the species, which animal the problem came from. Lots less waste from that. I got back into food, but that's food and technology meeting. Software and technology systems to make large utilities better able to deal with distributed renewables. I'll stop there. That gives you a flavor of how we're looking for the gadgetry and the under the hood of what makes everything that we're all living with and doing right now, and what shifts the food system in as many positive ways as possible to reduce toxicities and damage.
So how has Renewal Funds kind of changed across the spectrum from kind of when it was first started to now you're on your fourth fund? What have you seen change?
Well, 10 years ago, 11 years ago when we started, we were considered pretty outlandish and a little nuts. That's how fast the field has changed. This time while we're raising money, we're talking to institutions and people that we've known for a long time, particularly wealth managers, that will say, we've got a dozen impact investment funds in our pipeline. We will never get to you for due diligence. There's so many players now in the landscape. That's a big success for us. So that's changed. We're having to keep getting smarter and learn more about the different industries that are available to us. So I think the most important thing to say is the most important thing to say is that it is to watch the field advancing, which raises the game on us and causes us to get smarter and have younger, smart people that are more prepared to deal. We have a 12-person team, and so we've got to up our game.
Well, the next panel has that taken care of too. So we're going to open it up to questions now. So we welcome them.
Okay. Hello. First of all, thank you all for being here. This is really cool. My name is Dimitri, and so you focus a lot on agricultural issues, and you seem to have a negative view on fossil fuels, even though they have a lot of really positive impacts on things like medicine and high technology and in general our standard of living. What is your reasoning for focusing so much on food and agriculture rather than what to me seems like the more core issue of clean energy generation?
So the reason we're called the No Regrets Initiative is because regenerative ag is considered a no regrets negative emissions strategy. So right now we've got over 400, does anybody know what it is today? 420 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, right? So clean energy is going to do what? It's going to maybe reduce the amount of emissions that we put out, right? But we have too much. We're still putting stuff out. We're still putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so clean energy will help us to produce less of that, but there's still excess in the atmosphere. What are we going to do about that, right? So agriculture is a way for us to take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soil where it belongs. And so it's a negative emission strategy. And so I'm not saying that clean energy is bad or that we shouldn't focus on it. We absolutely need that. We do need to reduce the amount that we're putting out of the atmosphere, but we need both solutions, right? We need to put out less and we need to put more. We need to take more out of the atmosphere.
And fossil fuels are awesome. I hope they're around for 1,000, 5,000 more years. It's not going to be a good idea to burn them up right now. We really should use them for the preciousness that they are. And the ways that we're using them now make food waste look like, I mean, the waste factor in fossil fuels now is embarrassing. So efficiency, alternative power sources, everything we can do, and use fossil fuels for what really matters. They're magic, but we're squandering it, and we're kind of cheating society with the concentration of ownership and distribution and control of it, and the way the political system actually is supporting burn it as fast as we can. That's not smart.
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm a first year MBA student focused on sustainable business development. And Esther, while I so admire your approach and not having metrics and measuring, my question is, how do you decide what project to take on? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so for us, it's about context and it's about people. And so we often talk about bright spots. So we like to invest in people who are not only doing the great work on the ground, but also have the potential to influence others, to be leaders in their community and among their peers. So those are the kinds of people that we're looking for. Obviously, the businesses have to be sound, but that's sort of the driving mechanism that we have behind how we make our decisions.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, my name is Nish. I'm a first year MBA, also specializing in sustainable business practices. My question's for Esther Park, and I'm curious why you are investing in grass-fed cattle grazing, considering that 15% of our CO2 equivalent emissions are from animal agriculture?
So those emissions are from confined confinement operations, right? So most of the cattle in the United States today are confined on a feedlot. And so if you've ever driven past a feedlot, you'll notice that there's nothing green growing out of the ground there. And the animals are all together and they're eating corn, soy, they're eating stuff that they're not supposed to be eating. And a lot of the emissions are coming from that kind of operation. A grass-fed beef operation is actually very different. So folks who are using good rotational management of their cattle are actually growing really diverse green grasses out of the ground that are performing the necessary functions of photosynthesis, which sequester carbon into the soil. So if you've ever driven past a grass-fed beef operation, it looks very different. It's very lush and it's very green. And by doing the work that they do, it not only sequesters carbon in the soil, but it prevents runoff. It helps the soil to absorb water into the ground instead of just running off into the waste stream. So grass-fed beef operations managed well are actually very beneficial to the environment.
I guess my follow-up question to that would be, how can we do that on a scale we're currently consuming beef in this country? Because there's not enough land for all the cattle we have to be grass-fed.
So a majority of the grain that we grow in the middle of the country, all that corn and soy, a lot of that goes to animal feed. It doesn't need to be. We could convert that to prairie, and we could put grass-fed cattle on there. Sorry, back to prairie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just while you're passing the mic, I mean, one of the things that people don't know is that most of the agriculture that's done in the Midwest is not for human consumption.
Hello, my name is Brenna Leach. I'm an MBA and Masters of Nonprofit Management candidate here. My question is for both of you. One of the large trends in the industry right now is this idea of supporting local knowledge, to really have a re-indigenization of how we approach impact investment and impact philanthropy. I'm curious, because you have a different perspective with multiple investors and a single investor, how do you overcome potential challenges and alleviate concerns for investors that might have different interests than what local knowledge says is best practice?
Maybe this is a sad and revealing answer. Most investors that can do the kind of investing, private equity investing, have a lot of money, and most of them are not thinking about this. They may be thinking about getting their money out of some kind of opaque global system that they don't understand. There are investors that are in the movement of relocalizing. They're not tending to invest in this kind of product. They're going more local, which is hard to do. You can't really do a venture capital model very often or very easily with what local, smaller businesses are. So there's a whole system, financial system of different products and different niches, and Esther is going to be much closer to what you're asking.
So there's a lot of arrogance that comes with money, and we've seen it in both the investment field and the philanthropy field. And I think that for us, we try to check our arrogance, and because we have the ranch, because we are actually doing it, in some ways we feel like we're peers with other folks, although obviously we have resources that most other farmers don't. But we are in a constant community. We stay in constant community with the folks that we typically lend and invest in. And so, we really try to keep that sort of peer approach. Also, on the philanthropy side, this fall we're going to be doing a really sort of unique take on our grant making, which is a shared gifting model. So the idea is that we're going to take one area of our gifting, and in this case we're going to be doing it on policy and advocacy. And we're going to bring maybe a dozen people that are working in that space into the room, and we're gonna say, here's a pile of money, you guys decide how these grants should be made. And so, first we each give them a certain amount so that everybody can relax, everybody's got money, okay, it's all right, now relax. Now there's this pot of money and you guys have to decide what to do with it. And so, who knows, they're gonna maybe decide like just to split it up among themselves, maybe they'll decide most of it should go to actually this one group that's really doing something interesting. They could choose to give it to somebody that's not in the room, or they could choose to give it towards a collective project that they wanna do together. So in that way, we're trying to really bring the collective wisdom of the local wisdom that you're talking about into the room to help make those decisions.
Thank you very much.
My name is Mimi and I'm from Master of Science in Finance. So I'm just curious about we were talking about impact investing. So we basically talk lots about impact to our society and environment. But I just really wondering, how do you guys take a return for the investors? Just how do you choose it's a nice project for them to get their return, since this is the investing instead of non-profit?
So we're in a different type of business with the money that we're each working with right now, at least in a major portion of it. We are attempting to prove that people can move money into things that matter more and to make an above market rate return. So that's the business that we're in, and we're finding companies that are growth companies. And we need to get in early enough at the right time to help the company bring resources to help the company grow. There's a marketplace out there that buys companies, and that's the model. You can make money there.
So I said that we were return agnostic, which is true, but we don't do dumb stuff. We don't try to lose our money. We do want to have our money back, and if it has a return, that's great. It turns out that actually we do a lot of loans. So we do both loans and equity investments. And loans are a really great, solid way to make a return. I mean, the IRR on our loan portfolio is somewhere around 7%. So, equity portfolio, who knows, it's too early to say, but yeah. So debt provides a really nice, solid return.
My name is Christina. I'm with the Master's of Accounting program. So a lot of what you've mentioned seems to be directed towards investors who have large amounts of money to invest. What would be your recommendations for the average citizen who's just looking to invest what, by many standards, would be considered chump change in a responsible way?
Great question. So there are some intermediaries out there that take money from just regular old people like you and me. So, some of them take money in $1,000 increments. And so you can essentially make a loan to, say, a loan fund, and they will return your capital, I don't know, the interest rate varies, 1%, 2%, 3%. And you can invest in those. So one of them actually that's here in Oregon is called Craft 3. And I know that they offer notes to Oregon residents. So you could look into them. They make loans to rural businesses in Oregon and Washington. There's another one called RSF Social Finance, which is the one that I used to work at in San Francisco. They lend nationwide, but they also offer 3-month notes. So you can have pretty good liquidity on that. There is an issue in the sense that we just don't have good financial products for unaccredited investors that want to look for impact. So I think that's still a very immature market, and there's not a lot of product. There is a new website called Investabule, and it's sort of, I call it kind of like the kayak of crowdfunding. So, there's a lot of intermediaries out there that are helping crowdfund businesses. And Investabule sort of aggregates all of those, and you can actually You can filter on location, on the kind of impact you're looking for, like what do you care about, and it'll show you all of the potential things that you can invest in. And so through the new crowdfunding law, all of those are available to unaccredited investors. So you can invest in private companies through crowdfunding sources like that. So there are a few things that do exist, but by and large, yeah, it's pretty limited.
And my only addition to this is that they are growing. People are getting very inventive and entrepreneurial about helping smaller investors get involved.
Also, Jake Radin, who will be on the next panel, is right here in front. You can have as little as $50 to start investing, so we'll talk more about that. With Swell, that's his company.
Hey, Joshua Stove, I teach in the MBA program. It's exciting to have you here. I have a question. I'm curious if you can tell stories of persuasion, of when you've persuaded people in the mainstream. I mean, just hearing you speak, it's incredibly compelling, but you're obviously total weirdos, and we are total weirdos for being in here on a day this nice, as Ryan hinted at early on. And so I find that out and about in the world, and even in Eugene, there are times when people do not feel the urgency that you described that drove many people in from the sun today, here in this room. People often don't see the connection to their daily lives, and then on top of it you have this loud world of, say, investing and business press that sends messages that are not just perpendicular to what you're saying, but actually conflict with that. I mean, just the use of the word spirituality, removed any chance that you get to be on Fox News in the future. So, but I'm curious, if you can just give us an example of how you have, if you have one, of how you've reached people whom you find more in the mainstream, and like what was compelling, because I think we will all want to be able to do more of that in the future.
I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot more young people around, and they're thinking differently, and they're paying attention, a lot of them are paying attention to what they buy and where they shop, where they bank, all these kinds of things. The demand is growing and the products are growing. I've only mostly talked about, I came here in the frame of, I've got Mission Venture Capital, but I put a lot of my life work into convenings. And one part of those convenings is with people that have money. And so you've heard us talk about some stories of high net worth individuals. There are support networks, there are learning networks happening, there are all kinds of events. I put a lot of time into both bringing together high net worth individuals to share stories and talk about these issues and help each other move along and unleash money. A lot of people sit on huge amounts of money and are boxed out by their wealth managers psychologically and emotionally from really getting in there. There's that whole gatekeeper syndrome, which is understandable. So there is a kind of an awakening consciousness movement that's also happening alongside the things we're talking about. And people are gathering more and more. There are all kinds of wealth organizing movements, from the very radical ones to fairly mainstream ones, that are support groups, information groups, co-learning, and this kind of thing, that are really exciting to look back over and see someone who ends up inheriting $300 million and is on fire to put that money into things that matter to them, becoming empowered. So just know that that's also happening.
So when we were naming our fund, we almost called it Lunatic Fringe. Because yes, we are on the crazy end of things, but you know what? We're having a lot of fun. And so actually our strategy is really more about really exhibiting joy and optimism and like fighting for the future we want as opposed to fighting against something. And so just the sort of like leaning forward and doing it with so much joy, we find, is such an attractive thing for people. I don't know of like any specific examples where we've moved to the mainstream necessarily, but sort of one by one as we're encountering people, there's just this like, I want what you have, I want to do that. And so like the more and more we have people who are willing to say that to their investment advisors, I think the more you'll start to see things changing, and we are starting to see some.
And they are also in the convening work, and they're convening group after group to look at land issues or all kinds of money issues. And one of the things I'm doing for RSF Social Finance, that same organization, with a group, and Esther is one of the support resources for it, is attempting to start training people that will have the skill set and the mindset to use classic financial tools and then innovative ones to deploy capital for social and environmental goods in the future. If you go out right now to try to hire such a person, there's not a profession out there that deploys social change money or that deploys this kind of integrated capital. Do the best you can with it. That's not what the financial system has been set up for. So having, some of you are going to end up in these situations where either your family or someone with a lot of money, you're going to end up in a situation and they're going to want innovation and have money deployed differently. Don't forget that.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you, everyone. Stretch break, and we're going to start the next panel at 5:30 sharp. And they're going to be around to chat with, also at the reception starting at 7. So thank you again.
So I'm glad to see so many people came back after the stretch break, despite the nice weather that's still outside. So as you're getting settled, I'm going to ask you to stretch a couple more times before I introduce the panelists. Right? So raise your hands if you have ever, in the past or currently, worked in impact investing. Okay. 4 or 5 people, all right. Raise your hands if you are hoping to work in impact investing. All right, a few more. Now our impact measurement for this panel is going to be if we can get more hands up at the end of this. All right. So before I go ahead and introduce the panelists, so I teach social entrepreneurship and impact philanthropy here at the University of Oregon in the Planning Public Policy Management program. And this has been kind of an eventful week for impact investing. So just to kind of set the stage here. So yesterday, one of the largest financial asset managers, Blackstone, announced their impact investing strategy. They're going to focus on healthcare, financial access, sustainable communities. So that was already pretty big news. But earlier this week, we actually had a story on impact investing in the New York Times. Just talking about the sector, how it's growing, and got pretty wonky about things like impact measurement as well. So again, for those of us that have worked in impact investing for a decade or so, getting picked up in the mainstream media, getting mainstream impact and mainstream investors thinking about impact, this is pretty big news. So it's a particularly timely week to be talking about impact investing. So we're really excited to have. So I'm going to start just with brief introductions. To my right, we have Jake Graydon, who's a portfolio manager at Swell Investing. To his right, we have Brad Harrison, who is a managing director at Tiedemann Advisors. And then we also have John Hershey, who is director of alternative investments at the Oregon State Treasury. Now, what I'm going to ask each of them to do, and also, of course, as you heard, unfortunately, Betsy Moser couldn't join us today due to personal reasons, but we're hoping that we still have a great panel and a great discussion here. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give some really short introductions, say a little bit about their organization's investment philosophy and what they do there, and just how they actually define impact here, right? So why don't we start with Jake and then move on.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Jake Graydon. I lead the impact portfolio teams at Swell Investing. Swell Investing is a sort of digitally native, digital-first investing platform online. We welcome people of all ages, but it's if you go there, you can see it's a little bit targeted towards a younger audience. Our objective at Swell is to make impact investing, in particular for us in public equities, accessible to anyone who has as little as $50 to invest. We have a technology partner that enables us to do that with fractional shares, and normally you wouldn't be able to invest in large portfolios directly outside of a fund structure with so little money, but we are able to do that. We're not the only ones, but we've been doing it for about 2 years now. Our approach to impact is that impact is personal. Impact can be measured. It doesn't necessarily have to be measured the same way by everyone all the time. Context is important, as we heard from the earlier panelists. So, but what we use is we use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a large, unifying, consensus agreed upon and informed structure or framework for considering the principal business activities of firms and whether or not we classify them in that way as impact by aligning their principal business activities to UN's Sustainable Development Goals and their sub-goals using a sustainable development investment taxonomy, essentially. So it's complicated. You can read more about it on the website if you're interested. But so we look at what companies do primarily, and then we look at how they do those things. So ESG scores are involved. I don't know if we're going to get into that or not. That's one way that people try to measure impact on public equities. We like to look at revenue derivation. There's a lot of ways to do it, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get more people informed, more people to understand what impact investing is, how that works across asset classes, in our case, like I said, public equities, and just be a place for people to do that from an early age or any age, really.
Is this working? Go. My name is Brian Harrison. I am a managing director, partner, co-head of impact investing at a firm called Tiedemann Advisors. And what we do, much like what Esther does for a single family office, we're technically what's called a multi-family office. So we work with a handful of investors across the country, multi-generational families and their foundations. And we do a number of things with investment management, impact investing, trust and estate services, philanthropic planning, and this term called family office services, which is somewhat ambiguous, right? We currently manage about $22 billion. What we thought was sort of interesting, having me sit next to Jake, is Jake's on sort of one end of the spectrum, and we tend to deal with families and foundations maybe on the other end of the spectrum, but you know, neither one approach is better than the other. We invest across all of the asset classes, so that's a theme of this panel. We're going everywhere from public equities to fixed income, hedge funds, alternatives, private investments, venture capital, and cash, sort of all the way down the line. We have our own sort of theory of change around impact investing, but what we really try to do is express our clients' values in their portfolios.
Thanks, Brad. So, John Hershey, I'm the Director of Alternative Investments at the Oregon State Treasury. I have overall responsibility for alternatives, which are really defined as private equity, private real estate, other real assets, private credit, hedge funds. So it's everything that's not kind of the traditional stocks and bonds. That comprises about 45% of the portfolio for the Oregon Public Employee Retirement Fund, which is a defined benefit plan for public employees. And I'm sure we'll get into more depth on that. In terms of impact investing, I am the fish out of water here. We don't do impact investing. I'll describe a little bit of what we do. By the way, I'm a fish out of water because I didn't get the memo to grow beard. Just noticed that there. You know, impact investing means different things for different folks, but we're a fiduciary, which means we really don't use societal or political influences on business.
Yeah, I got the memo yesterday, so. So great introductions, and as we see, we've got a lot of different types of investors and a lot of different clients, right? So as we're starting to dig into each of these different organizations, what I'd love to get from each of you is just, could you say a little bit more about what your typical clients are like? Who are you investing for? And maybe what's driving them to think about impact or alternative investments, as we might want to call them. So, Jake, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I maybe hit on a little bit before. So we have a pretty young clientele by and large when we look at the demographics of our users. Swell has about 15,000 funded accounts today. Please don't quote me on this, clients will kill me. 50 to 60% of those are Gen Z, or did I get that right, Gen Y, or millennial. We do have other folks who invest with us, but by numbers of people, it skews young. It crosses gender. There isn't a strong preference one way or the other, which some people are surprised to hear. Yeah, so it's a younger group of people. Average accounts are $1,000 to $2,000. Spans the range, barbell, as you may expect. And I forgot the second part of the question.
What drives them?
Oh, yeah. I think I'm in that demographic that makes up a larger percentage of our customers, and I think it's generational. We've grown up with climate change being something that's taught in schools. We grew up with Earth Day. At least I did in Southern California. I can't speak for everyone, but at least enough people looking at our website also feel that way. So I think that there's a zeitgeist amongst younger generation. I don't think it's anyone that is in a younger generation. There's a zeitgeist there too, but overwhelmingly with younger generations to try to be conscious with everything they do, whether it's what food they buy, what clothes they wear, what car they eventually drive, what they study, like the sustainable business MBAs that are filling this room. So I just think that it's a zeitgeist, it's a shift in people's preferences and what they think is an acceptable way to go about living in a relatively free market sort of capitalist society, and whether you leave something behind that's worse or better.
Our typical clients, so we sort of we manage money for two types of clients: taxable clients, being people, and tax-exempt clients, being foundations, endowments, pensions, institutional investors, those sorts of things. On the taxable client side, it's either a typical profile would be a family just had liquidity events on the business, made a bunch of money, and wants to hire an investment advisor to do the right thing with that money. Another profile would be a multi-generational family where keeping the family's values in line with their investments is a priority. And then on the taxable side, foundation endowments typically have a pretty clear mission statement for which they want to align their investments with. So it's across the board. It's also sort of across the board. It's a very vague answer on sort of what drives them, because on one end of the spectrum, we have clients who this is a moral imperative. And for other clients, this is just a better way to invest. So it's broad-ranging.
For the state, the essential client are the retirees and active employees of the public enterprises, whether it's the school district, ODOT, and so those number in the kind of the tens of thousands. And we have other constituents, so we would have the employers who are responsible in part for funding their retirement. Remember, this is a defined benefit program, so it differs from a 401k, in which they know essentially through a formula what kind of their retirement income will be, and that was essentially a contract of their employment, either currently or before they retire. Generally, that constituent is representative of the rest of the population of the state. Probably what's most important to them, and it varies, would be making sure they get that check. So they want to make sure, we believe that the state will honor that explicit contract with them. So we focus for being, essentially on that risk-adjusted return. So we talked a little bit about the different motivations of folks here represented on the panel. And the state is meant to manage these funds, but the funds are the beneficiary's funds. It's their assets, it's not the state's assets. The state manages it, and it manages it from a fairly traditional fiduciary way. Our focus is really on that market return. We can talk a little bit more down the road on some of the things we do in addition to kind of pure market return, but that tends to be the primary implementation.
So maybe, John, if we could kind of pick up where you left off. So you started to say, a little bit about how, as the state is managing pension funds, and pension funds being obviously such a huge source of investment capital, your fiduciary responsibilities, of course, to maximize those returns, but there are other considerations that are starting to get layered in. And I was curious, could you say a bit more about what's happening in Oregon about those alternative investments? Are there other states that are doing similar things, or maybe other countries as well? What's the sort of status of impact or alternative investments for pension funds?
Sure, so let's maybe start with some definitions, and because alternative investments mean different things to different folks, right? And so there's a type of investor who focuses on hedge funds, and traditionally what we call alternative investments were really limited to hedge funds. Now alternatives is really kind of a superset of other kinds of investments. Private equity is a large portion of the Oregon portfolio, comprising about half of our, what we would call alternative investments. But that's not the only thing. Then we would have private real estate. So Oregon would, and by the way, in private equity, if you kind of peel back the onion, that's both, traditional buyouts, leverage buyouts. It's also growth capital, and it's also venture capital, and it's also at times distressed debt capital. So that would be the individual components of, say, private equity. In real estate, you might break that down in three forms. You would have, core real estate across several property types. The main property types would be offices, multifamily apartments, industrial, which is really a fancy word for warehouses, and retail, which is a fancy word for shopping centers primarily. So those are your traditional property types. And then on the risk spectrum, you would have core. So again, let's use office as an example. That would mean an office building that's fully leased up with a very creditworthy tenant base, and it sits within the central business district of a gateway city like New York City or San Francisco. So it is meant to be fairly low risk. It has not a lot of mortgage or leverage on it. So that's at the lower end of the risk spectrum. Opportunistic might be a brand new development. So there's a lot of risk in getting that permitted, getting it built, and getting it leased up, right? So you have different kind of risk spectrum associated with it. The other alternatives would be things that are other real assets. They might be infrastructure. So when you think of infrastructure, you might think of transportation, like airports and ports. But you might also think of energy infrastructure. Primarily there you would think of oil and gas pipelines to transport the natural resources. So there are a number of things that would comprise infrastructure. You have social infrastructure as well. So people think of that in the UK as schools and hospitals. Other areas of real assets, real estate would be natural resources. So there you think of oil and gas, metals and mining, as well as timber and agriculture. So those would comprise the swath of natural resources. And then there are more idiosyncratic alternatives like hedge funds. We have a full panel in there.
So this kind of gives us a little bit of sense of where these investments are flowing. Now, I'd like to ask Brad maybe to comment a little bit about this, since you work both on the managing philanthropy and sort of foundation endowments as well as private investors. And could you say a bit more about just in the years that you've been doing this with Tiedemann, where's the growth? Is it coming more from philanthropic organizations and foundations that are thinking, okay, let's use our endowment to invest in impact? Or is it happening more from mainstream investors, high net worth individuals that are just thinking about investing for impact as part of their investment strategy?
I think the growth in impact is being generated by millennials and particularly women who are inheriting wealth. Yeah. There's a huge transfer of wealth right now going on in the United States between the retired generation and those two demographics in particular are driving this. It's happening on the tax exempt side with foundations and endowments just because it should happen, right? Like that just makes a lot of sense. Clear mission statement, easy to align with. You know, why have your philanthropic dollars fighting against your investment dollars? You know, that's just been like a very clear argument that's, you know, most rational people I think would agree with. But on the taxable side, on sort of the high net worth side, it's this new generation of wealth holders that are making the decision to do this.
Great. And Jake, so with Swell's investment strategy, so with the idea that you can be an impact investor with $50, I mean that's relatively new. I mean, I know obviously there's other organizations that are doing similar work and calibrates their investment note for many years. But again, can you say a bit more about just who are these investors, and maybe also what are some typical investment sizes that you're seeing? Are these literally people that are opening $50 accounts? Are they $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 accounts? What's the average size look like here?
Yeah. Like I said, there's a barbell. So you get, and we are only one asset class, which is equities. And if you want to get really technical, U.S. equities for the most part, but we do invest internationally through what are called ADRs, depository receipts, so you can access stocks that are traded not in the U.S. through these depository receipts, and if you're careful about it, you choose the right ones, and they're sponsored, they're relatively liquid and secure investments. Sometimes they're not. We try to avoid those. Part of the reason the account sizes are small with us, and that's a challenge we have, that is a known challenge, is that the people investing in us don't have a lot of money. Maybe you've been paying attention to what's going on in the economy, right? Wages are finally growing again, but it's recent. There was a very long period of time where they were not. So people come to us typically are just starting to build wealth if they have any at all, which is kind of the point of the platform, is get started, get saving. Part of the way we like to think of impact is helping people do what's right for themselves financially. And so if you only have $50 to invest, here's a place to do that. We'll take that. We're happy to steward that money for you. As Swell's only 2 years old, so as Swell grows, we hope very soon to offer more asset classes, and that may be through other people's products or maybe through products that we develop ourselves. Right now, we develop our own portfolios. We have a very specific focus now where we develop the portfolios because our CEO, a guy named Dave Fanger, he started Swell from within Pacific Life. It's a corporate venture, so it's a startup, but it's a startup that was incubated. He 4 or 5 years ago realized that he could buy a Tesla, he could go to Whole Foods, he could buy organic, he could be careful about where he shopped for clothes, but he couldn't find an investment product that he felt really, really, really proud of or good about. He could buy some mutual funds and some ETFs that tried to get there, but invariably Exxon was in them or something else he found objectionable, whatever it is you find objectionable. So we take a very deliberate focus on trying to make those equity investment products that are very clearly what we intend them to be, and we try to be transparent about that. And I think people come to us who are not terribly sophisticated investors, which may seem counterintuitive or maybe not what you want, but it's on purpose. We're trying to be a place for that. So we focus on transparency. You don't even have to open an account. You can see every holding we have in every portfolio, the weight of the company. You can click on it, you can see what they do. You can see what SDGs their revenues align with. You can see their key initiatives. For the most part, we're missing a few. It's big work. We are going after a very underserved part of the market, which may, again, seem counterintuitive, but we try to take an institutional approach to that in the way we make our products so that we can use the big accounts to subsidize all the small accounts and sort of bring everybody along.
All right, so Now we're going to start talking a little bit more about that impact side of impact investing. And I know, this is something that comes up a lot about measurement and how we think about impact measurement. I think an interesting phrase someone told me at a conference was, like how do you go beyond good intentions, right? So could you say a little bit more about, for each of your programs, how you think about measuring impact, how do you think about picking the investments that you're making? Jake, you spoke a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a lot of other frameworks out there. So how do you think about actually measuring and screening and conducting due diligence based on impact? Can you speak a little bit more about that? Why don't we start with Jake here?
I'll try to keep it kind of brief because I touched on a little bit of this, but more specifically, so we have like a pretty robust, we like to think rigorous process around, it's a three-step process where we first look at the revenue generating activities of the company. We say, what do you make or sell? And we try, we use taxonomy to say, okay, that is aligned or not aligned with goals and sub-goals of these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We next look at what we call operational alignment. So these are your more traditional, this is where it gets a little wonkier, ESG scores, which come from third-party providers. We don't choose one, we try to take a consensus approach, so we are constantly evaluating third-party data providers. We look for where there's agreement, where there's disagreement across those, and we try to take a consensus scoring approach because the idea is the more analysts, the more people doing research, the more people trying to gather data on companies and evaluate them. We think that's maybe a good way to generalize that information. And then we have a third sort of pillar, which is controversial activities. So we use third-party controversy data. We used to try to scan all the news, but it didn't work very well. Like 500 companies, it's just kind of intense. So we look at the severity of the controversies, the nature of the controversies, if you're familiar with SASB, materiality of the types of controversies that companies have, and we have a pretty strict policy for what gets you kicked out or what gets you not let in the first place on the basis of those controversial activities. It's some combination of quantitative and qualitative. So we start with a really big index called the ACWI IMI, and we boil it all down. We fill in the gaps in coverage, which there tend to be a lot with ESG data providers. They try to hit a really big part of the market by aiming for some amount of market cap of tradable equities, which naturally leaves out a really large number of a lot of small companies at the bottom. So we try to play as best as we can in the small and mid-cap space with our thematic portfolios because that allows us to offer something a little more differentiated. And it's around impact measurement. And what is impact? Well, smaller companies tend to do less things, and so they do more specific things. And so it's a lot easier to find companies that derive 100% of their revenue building, hardware for grid tie-ups for wind energy and intermittent power that cleans and moves the power before it hits the grid. That's an easy case to make. The larger companies are actually the harder case to make. Why do we hold Apple? Are phones impact? I don't know. Somebody might think so, but Apple makes it in on the operational characteristics. So Apple's 100% run on renewable power. They build solar farms in China for manufacturers. They have incredibly robust and well-disclosed supply chain policy and recycling policy. They build robust to recycle all their phones. So Apple does all these things operationally that we feel are aligned to the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals and running a sustainable business. So that's sort of the overall rubric of how we pick investments and how we look at and sort of try to measure impact without, to your point, getting so specific or losing so much context that it doesn't make sense. And the bigger the companies get, I mean, you have to evaluate them all on their own merits, really.
So, as I mentioned before, sort of our model is impact investing across asset classes, right? This concept of activating an entire portfolio, so everything from stocks, bonds, to fixed income, hedge funds, alternatives, all the way down the line. We've developed thematic approaches to doing that, and essentially developed what we call a theory of change around the type of intervention that we're seeking to utilize within each of the thematic approaches. So those include environmental sustainability, so think of everything from regenerative agriculture to sustainable timber, ecosystem services, clean tech, and so on. Education, so charter schools, education technologies, new platforms for online learning. There's just quite a bit going on in that space. The third is around financial wellness, so peer-to-peer lending, microfinance, affordable housing, all of these things. And then lastly, probably sort of the most interesting, growing, exciting theme that we have right now is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is really putting dollars back in the hands of underrepresented communities, women, people of color, and so forth. And obviously that intersects really across all the other themes. If you take, for example, our environmental sustainability theme and this theory of change, it's twofold. It's how do you get that 425 parts per million carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We think there's two good ways to go about doing it. It's reducing the amount of CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere, so that clean tech is a good way to do that. So that's where you're actually reducing the amount. But what we think is a better approach is this notion that Esther was talking about around sequestering. And forestry, ag, and ecosystem services are a good way to do that. So we take all of the investment strategies that we have, that we invest into, and again, we're not picking the stocks or bonds or pieces of land or the actual loans that we're making. We're investing in people, in funds that are going out and doing this. So we're an aggregator of information. We're sort of 2 steps removed from the actual impact that's being generated. But how we go about reporting it is sort of at the total portfolio level. What impact is this entire person's or foundations or endowments assets doing to advance whatever particular mission or goals that they set out to do?
Maybe we'll step back and put some context here just to describe kind of what the defined benefit portfolio is like relative to what you're hearing over here. And that is, if you think of that stack of market, pure market return over here and philanthropy up here, and then the steps in between where you start to utilize ESG factors, maybe in the first step up to market returns, and then maybe your SRI, and then impact investing, and then philanthropy. So that's more or less the continuum. And we're really in between that market return, but utilizing ESG factors, but not utilizing ESG factors as a primary weight in our due diligence, but as a part of an integrated due diligence process. So similar to Brad, and largely because of our size, we have a limited number of investment professionals in the States, so there's maybe 30 to 40, and we're managing about $100 billion of capital. So we wouldn't be able to do individual security selections. We're not reviewing the financial statements of individual companies. We are really due diligencing investment managers. So that's similar to what Brad does. Brad's doing it more with an overall thematic theme, and we're doing it much more broadly, if you will, because we're looking at investment managers primarily who can deliver a market rate of return. That's the overall objective, is a risk-adjusted return for those beneficiaries. On the diligence side, the primary things that you would diligence and investment management for is what is the firm like? What's the stability of the firm? Are there bad actors? We look at the team. What's the team's experience? What is the strategy of that investment manager? And what are the kinds of assets they in turn are investing in? And then what is their track record? And so those would be the primary things that we would look at and would help score. And it's a highly qualitative process. This is not a bank credit score process where you can plunk it into a computer and out pops a score and you do that at scale. So this is, we commit about, in the alternatives program, just to give you some sense, we commit about $6 billion a year across about 30 different investment managers. So the plurality of the kinds of investment commitments we're making is in the $250 million range. So it's $250 million, maybe up to $500 million for a large investment manager like a KKR or a PPG. So that's a different sort of due diligence process that's unique to a large institutional investor. We're not unique relative to other states. We're quite similar in the process that we use. But what we don't have is a specific program. Some states may have a specific program related to sustainability or impact investing or investing.
So, just so we're, kind of catching everything here, so this is just to kind of recognize that, even at all of these different scales, thinking about impact and measuring impact is really complex, and it's not just reducing it to a single number. We're taking into account all of these different factors, right? So I guess I wonder if you could also just say a little bit more about how's your sort of journey been into impact investing or this field. So just a sort of a self-reflection, perhaps maybe what led you to this career? What was your career path? Why are you here? Jake, would you like to start?
Yeah, so my career in this actually is probably shorter than yours, and I guess, I don't know how you classify yours, but so my undergrad I did environmental studies with a minor in econ, so I kind of, the University of Chicago at the time had a very small and new environmental studies program, and God bless him and rest in peace, Ted Steck, who was in charge of the program, was a geneticist, and he wanted all of the environmental studies students to know as much about econ as the econ grads at Chicago so that we could win. And so we had to take a lot of econ courses, and I took an environmental economics course, and it blew my mind. And so, and then after school, I did not go into anything related to either the environment or econ. I was a management consultant focused on sort of analytics and data stuff for a few years. But I met one of the partners at Green Alpha, which is where Betsy, the panelist who couldn't make it today, also works. We became friends when I was living in San Francisco, and he at the time had started a small firm, this firm called Green Alpha. They were just getting off the ground, and he recognized that this was, we had a similar way of thinking about the world, about the future, about sustainability, and he said, as soon as we're big enough, you should come help me do research. And so fast forward a few years later, I joined them in 2014. I was finishing a master's in public health, just to make things more random. I did not get an MBA, although good for you guys, I encourage you. And I ended up writing the thesis on benefits that are offered to women and whether or not differing levels of diversity at companies that hire women, and if they offer the benefits and women can stay in the workforce or have to quit, and elder care, it's a big thesis. Whether or not those companies actually get better over time as public equities their returns, which it looks like they do. That was back in 2014. So it was a winding, weird, strange journey. So if any of you feel like that's what you're on, that's okay. Keep networking, keep coming to these events, study hard. I think this industry is in the first innings of the size and scale that it will become. It's exploding. There will be opportunities for everyone. And so that's how I got there. I loved investing. I loved the environment. I love these social issues. I love every aspect of what I do, except for when the market goes down. But unfortunately, that is not severable for what I do, so you just deal with it.
I sort of had a circuitous path as well. My undergraduate degree at Cornell in finance. Got out of that, kind of got into the investment management industry and then into consulting, and then got into private equity, and was working for a private equity fund up in Portland called EcoTrust Forest Management. And they're an impact investment fund. And I sort of understood sort of the financial side of things and how to make money, but I didn't really get what the real impact that we were trying to have was. So I didn't get why it mattered to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. I didn't get what sort of the biological components of it, or why we were preserving habitat for animals and watersheds and all that. So I decided I needed to get a science degree. So I went back and I did a master's in environmental science at Yale, and figured out that there was this thing called impact investing. I didn't even know that when I was at the Forest Fund. And it was really, impact was sort of a way for me to combine those two interests, the finance and the environment, in a pretty, that made sense to me. I liked using the power of capital markets to affect some change in the world. I sort of bought into it, sort of more from the business side, or the finance side, or the more capitalistic side. I think the sort of the more philanthropic or impact side. But then out of there, I found my way to a family office group up in Seattle. And it was really a way to take a look at all sorts of sort of the best private equity and venture funds that were doing impactful things out there. And we got to fly around all over the place doing diligence on these funds. And you know, I sort of like that part of the work. I lead our environmental sustainability work at the firm, and you know, I use both sides of my brain here, the sort of the art and the science. And I guess if there's one piece of career advice I'd give you is don't be afraid to focus on the impact side of things. You know, I try to hire a lot at our company. We see so many people coming out of sort of the traditional MBA programs, so sort of wired, like they need the CFA, they need to find all this stuff. But like if you're doing impact investing, really think about what impact you're trying to generate, and sort of don't be afraid to tap that.
I like the way you described it as circuitous. I always have described it for me as a Harvard Business School case study for how not to build a career. But I'll kind of back up. You know, right out of college, I did public finance investing, so primarily for 501c3 organizations like colleges and universities. So, for example, at the University of Oregon, we're doing a capital improvement or some new buildings, you go out and issue tax-exempt debt, and I would have been an investment banker who would have done that kind of issuance. Went off to Chicago like Jake did when I got my MBA there, and then continued migrating east from the West Coast and did venture capital in New York. Wanted to move back to the West Coast, and so joined a technology investment bank in what was the go-go days of the second half of the 90s when the first internet kind of bubble was being created. Left there to become a partner at a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Then the bubble burst, and I repotted myself and moved from being a general partner to a limited partner, and that's what took me up to Oregon. One of the things I really liked about that, and why I stayed, is that as a venture capitalist, I was an inch wide, mile deep, and what I do now is really the reverse, and I happen to just prefer the breadth of things that I can look at. You know, one day, I think a year into the job, I was interviewing a convertible bond arbitrage manager, which is a very geeky kind of strategy in the morning, and I was touring a tree farm in the afternoon. So it really did give me some breadth, and I found that really quite rewarding. I think I'm going to use the word impact in a lower case I instead of the uppercase I that we're kind of talking about here. You know, I realize that, you know, the way I've talked about it seems fairly sterile, this, you know, kind of what we're doing at the state in terms of investing, and that there's no kind of higher reading or anything of that sort. But, you know, let's think about downstream what's really happening here. So we have these retirees, there's been a promise, the state has to honor that promise. We today have, you know, probably a promise of about $100 billion in net present value of liabilities. We have a pension plan that's about $75 billion in assets. So we have a mismatch, we're underfunded. By no means are we alone, so don't be too concerned. But, you know, for every dollar that we can get additional, you know, it really helps reduce that unfunded liability. If we didn't earn that dollar's got to come somewhere else. And so, you know, it really comes from the state. You know, that's where a large part of the budget, if you've heard about PERS, and that's going to be the big topic, or is the big topic, you know, in Salem. You know, PERS is squeezing out the rest of the budget. If you're a school district and hire another teacher, you can't afford them. And so the ability to generate returns has a very impactful, is very impactful really in the state budget. And so we're balancing that kind of, you know, get the best returns for the state, so it can do other things with that budget that might be, you know, kind of more appreciated by the population, alongside, you know, that philanthropic, you know, up that philanthropic stack, right? And so we also have a scale problem. To do a lot of traditional impact investing is quite difficult to do at scale. So we have some investment managers who have raised impact investing funds. These are very well-known investment managers like KKR and TPG. And even they are doing it on a fairly small size because it's actually quite difficult to go find companies where you could write a large equity check and generate a return that's acceptable and still find companies that are impactful. You think it might be easier because there ought to be a huge universe, but in fact it's quite difficult. And so that's the early innings part where these are very early, somewhat large managers who are starting to do this. And pension plans are starting to fund that kind of strategy, but we're really, really in the first inning of that.
So this is a great point for, so what I hear are some reflections on just what's later here, and John, you started to talk about, just what are some concerns coming up ahead. And what I'd like to do, we've got about 15 minutes or so a few more questions and then we can open it up. So say a little bit more about just, when you think about impact investing and alternative investments going forward, what's the one thing you're really concerned about? And what's the one thing you're optimistic about?
Are more institutional investors at greater scale. So that's a super important part. We're seeing the investment managers themselves start to do this. So KKR, as part of their fund, is trying to push the envelope on how do we measure success. I think if you're looking at it philanthropically, you don't need that, right? If you're looking at it from a market rate return perspective, you really do. And so we can kind of bridge these things by improving the measurement, and that's really
Was it a challenge and opportunity?
Yes, so what are you concerned about in the future, and what's the one thing you're optimistic about?
Concerned about the wealth inequality gap. It's actually really, it's quite easy when you have a lot of money to make a lot of money. It really is. It just compounds pretty quickly. And it's also really easy, through the sort of all sorts of sophisticated tax shelters and other things to lower your tax bill. These are things ultra wealthy people do, which just then creates more wealth. So concerned about that, and that problem is getting dramatically worse. But what I'm optimistic about is the next generation. I talked about before this transition of wealth to millennials, and particularly women who are incorporating social and environmental values at a pretty impressive rate.
I realized I never gave you my optimistic. And it somewhat dovetails with measurement. So I sit on an association called the Institutional Limited Partners Association. It's international. It represents limited partners primarily in the private equity field. So there are about 500 entities, about 5,000 members. It represents about 4 or 5 trillion of capital. I also sit on, within that board, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And what's interesting there is there's a lot of attention on that from private equity investment managers. They've been seen to have a lot of diversity within their partnership ranks. What folks like ILPA are doing is trying to put together kind of a reporting mechanism. Because if you can measure, you can track over time, and what's nice is that some of this is a little easier to measure. It's, there are a few questions where you can start to track. And so I think what you'll see is these investment managers at partnership ranks improve their scores, if you will. And that won't happen overnight, but I think should have really good benefit demonstrated.
Thanks. What am I worried about? I'm worried that we're seeing a proliferation of products coming to the market, whether they're ESG products or impact ETFs. And I'm worried in the same way that I'm concerned about the way we try to sort of measure impact. It sort of reminds me of kind of the financialization of everything. And I know we're talking about finance, so bear with me for a second. That it's very easy to own the narrative regardless of what your intentions are. And so, you know, one of the reasons Swell resonates with the people that it does is they come into their portfolios and they don't see some of these things that don't immediately click with them. Why is that in there? We are small, we are new. The momentum behind all of this is much larger managers with much larger fund sizes, largely just investing in large and mid-cap, not even really mid-cap, mostly large cap and mega-cap companies. So my concern is that this is going to be quickly co-opted for the opportunity that it represents to get a lot of new clients who are going through a large wealth transfer who may not have advisors that are keyed into this or know what's going on. I mean, the biggest barrier to people coming to Swell with larger account sizes is that they have advisors who say, don't even think about it, or you gotta stay on the Merrill platform, or this is lunacy, or you're not gonna make a market return, which is crazy. Our products are respect, you're gonna track the market. I'm not making any promise of returns, but we try to make products the way other people make products. We just don't include every single thing they include. So I'm worried about what happens in the near term to how we talk about this and how we think about this and how that narrative gets changed or owned by different groups. And so that's why I think transparency, I think education, I think laying out exactly what you do and how you do it is extremely important. And then if people like what you do, great. If they don't, great. At least they know. What am I optimistic about? I'm optimistic that people like what we do at Swell. The fact that there are not a lot of people, there are people that I talk to who don't like what we do or have questions or think it's crazy. But most of the people I talk to seem to sort of immediately say, hey, that sounds pretty cool. Maybe they're not going to invest, maybe they are, I don't know. But it's not real hard to explain sort of the social and personal finance value proposition of what we're doing. That makes me optimistic because I feel like 10 years ago, I didn't even know what this was, and probably most of you didn't either. Not all of us, but many of you here probably didn't know what this was 10 years ago. So that makes me optimistic.
Great, and just, you know, so I'm going to ask a final question before we open up, but just as a point of optimism. So one of the things that the New York Times article said was that according to a study, nearly 3/4 of Americans have moderate to high interest in sustainable and social investing. So that sounds pretty good, right? So last question, and this is again a little bit of personal reflection. So what's maybe the one piece of advice you've received that was the most useful that you'd like to share, or what's just a general piece of advice you'd like to share for people that are thinking about careers in the sector? Because remember, our impact metric is getting more hands up. Anyone who would like to start?
Follow your passion. It's hard in the beginning because you're worried about getting that first job. You know, I certainly, and when you have job transitions, that's euphemistic for, you know, losing a job, finding a job. You know, it's really hard. And so don't settle. You know, follow that passion. It will work out, even if it's some trying times.
I think two things. One, impact investing is not a silver bullet for everything. It really isn't, and it shouldn't be applied in all situations. And then secondly, get past this conversation around trade-offs, financial impact trade-offs. Once you get past that, it's actually a much better place.
Mine's similar to yours, but maybe with a twist. Definitely follow your passion. If you love this, do everything you can to be involved. It will happen, even when the darkest times when you think it will never happen, that's typically when it happens. And don't be afraid if you have to take a different job while you interview and write and read and network and try to, that's okay. Like, there are going to be times in your life, there have been in mine at least, where I wasn't doing everything I wanted to be doing and getting paid for it, but it helped me get to the point where now I am. I hope I will always be doing this. I don't know if I always will. I'm going to keep trying, but forgive yourself. You're trying to break into an industry that is new, that is fractured, that is crowded in certain spaces, and not explored in other ones. So yeah, just like acknowledge that it's okay, and then you'll be fine.
All right, fantastic. So before we do that final survey, just to see, do we have any impact, we're going to open it up for questions. So I think.
Hi, my name is Tim Bunyan. I'm a second-year MBA with a finance specialization. My question's mostly for Jake, but anyone feel free to answer, mostly because you deal with hundreds of companies at a time with your assessments. My question is mostly pertaining to greenwashing that's starting to become a trend as impact investing becomes more prevalent. And we see a lot of companies that want to try to claim responsibility for material impact that's not necessarily intentional from their business model. So how do you address that with your portfolio analysis and your due diligence when you're looking at companies?
Yeah. So I think for people like me who do things like what I do, which is look at public equities and try to build portfolios around these kinds of ideas and these kinds of processes, there's a couple ways to address that. One, don't solely rely on a third-party data set, because companies have to choose in a lot of cases whose surveys they answer, what information they disclose, how well they answer those questions, who to hire to answer those questions within the department. So, like, just because, and Wall Street Journal highlighted this with Tesla versus Exxon, we were talking about this earlier at lunch, like, yeah, you can have ESG scores that say fossil fuel company is a better ESG company than Tesla. So, and Tesla has governance problems, we know that if you follow it, but what we try to do as well is have a robust process that is clear, that is followed, that is accountable, and requires us to have eyes on every single company before we put it in someone's portfolio. And myself and our team of 3, sometimes 4, we all have to agree that this, and we all come from different backgrounds, we all have different experience, but it's all in this area. And we all, as a consensus, agree that whether it's a great ESG score or not, on the basis of that process that we have defined, that we are accountable for, we believe that it fits that criteria. And then we're very clear with our customers about why and how we made that decision. So there may be better ways to do it, I don't know. We're trying to do it the best way we know how to do it. So for us it's about a genuine, accountable, robust process and reproducible results.
Okay, my question is for Jake again, but Brad and John, please feel free to chime in. So I was pretty relieved when you said that you had studied environmental studies, because this is a field that interests me, but I study environmental science and I don't really have a background in like finance or economics. So for someone who's like looking into this field, what are some like skills or knowledge that they should develop, and like, what kind of jobs are available for those people who don't exactly have that background?
You said you started out with finance and then went to science, right?
Yeah, I kind of did the reverse. I like to think, sort of look at the sort of the continuum of the impact investing ecosystem. You can sort of map all the way from the investor to the investee, right? So the investor could be anywhere from a huge institutional investor like John, or it could be like foundation endowment or wealthy family like us, or it could be a private equity or venture fund like Joel, or it could be a social enterprise that the PE fund would invest into. You could sort of track that all the way down, and you can enter at any one of those points, I think. And probably the best advice I can give you is sort of how close do you want to be to the actual deal or actual investment. Do you want to be sort of the guy out on the ground in the forest, counting the timber that will ultimately flow up to the private equity fund and sort of the forest land that is paying us back. That's contributing to whatever outcome we want. That's sort of one way to think about it. Is how close you want to be to the deal? What entry point do you want to sort of enter within? I think in terms of the skills, it's there's a ton of benefit someone with an environmental science degree would have to an investment firm. And that's actually sort of a much more interesting and unique background to bring to an investment firm than the next guy or gal with a finance degree, honestly. So I would say don't try to fit yourself into the mold of what you think the application would look like. Actually highlight the fact that you have an environmental science degree. You want to help the investment firm analyze the environmental impact of the investment rather than the financial impact of the investment.
Yeah, I would agree. I think going from the environmental science to the finance side is an easier path than the reverse. When I joined the state a little over 11 years ago, I had largely forgotten most of the investment courses that I had taken as an MBA. So I had to go back to the textbook and see what an efficient frontier was. And so, so how do you catch up? Well, in my case, I just read a lot of the academic papers and found that in kind of a year's time, I felt as conversant as my peers at work. In some cases, I felt like I was more caught up than they were. So I don't think you should be so quick with that.
I'll just book in that real quick. Sam and I were having this conversation earlier. So, if you really want to be like a quant PM or like a hardcore finance person, you're going to go get a CFA or something anyway. So I would say don't worry about that. There's some I'll get real basic here. Make sure you know how to use Excel with great high level of proficiency. That is literally useful in every freaking job I've ever had in my life. Whether it is environmental, whether it's working in a kitchen, it doesn't matter. If you can use Excel well, you're going to be useful to someone somewhere. I would say the same thing with like database SQL and some Tableau or some sort of visualization tool. Just be able to take data, use data, look at data, understand data, and communicate that to people. If you can do that, you can apply that to any industry, any job, anywhere, and that'll get your foot in the door doing all kinds of sorts of things that you might want to do.
Hey guys, my name is Jennifer. I am a startup founder from Portland coming down to see you guys, so thanks for that. My question for you is, Brad, you mentioned that a lot of the demographic that's really driving this space is women and millennials. And given that I'm not seeing any on the stage, but I'm seeing plenty in this room, given that you're the investors, what standard are you putting in place for yourselves to ensure that the money that you're managing is making its way to female or millennial or minority founders and companies so that the brain trust that is evolving and getting into the spaces where you're at eventually are getting the resources that they need to do that?
Great question. So this is somewhat embarrassing being on a panel, 4 white guys. It shouldn't be like that. Or 3 white guys. Before we launched our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy at the firm, we took a look at ourselves and we changed, because we wanted to make sure that the internal practices of the company were reflective of what we were trying to do externally. So we, sort of in typical bureaucratic fashion, we brought in a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. We changed our hiring practices. We changed our policies. We did all sorts of things to ensure that we had the concepts of diversity and inclusion at all levels of the firm, far and wide. Right? We've gone through that process over the past couple of years, and now we're able to, I think with a little more authenticity, launch this strategy, which is essentially investing in people of color and women. Because if you look at the venture capital industry as an example, what is it, less than 2% of dollars, 3% dollars go to women, which is pathetic. So that's how we're addressing it.
Hi, I want to thank you for coming down. I'm Mike Russo. I'm the founding director of the Center for Sustainable Business Practices. I've got a question for John. You talked about this scale from traditional investments to philanthropy and implicitly suggesting there's a type of trade-off that Brad was talking about. A quick review using my iPhone suggests that a typical socially responsible investment fund returned a multiple of what oil and gas did. Now the number I got, I just looked with my iPhone, the Calvert Equity Fund returned 16% a year over 10 years. It's the longest period I could find. Oil and gas was 3%. I'm a PERS member. What the hell are we doing investing in oil and gas? And that's before you recognize the fact that the risks of those particular investments are dramatically higher than socially responsible investments. So the question to you is, don't we have a sign error here?
So what we run is a diversified portfolio. And that means you're also going to be in the energy space. And you're going to be in the energy space whether it's up or down. We don't, and we never try to forecast which way the world's going to be like in 5 years. Right? So you're going to have that exposure. Energy is a pretty large segment of GDP in the US, and so you're going to have that exposure. You're going to have it in the public markets through index funds, and you're going to have it in the private markets through upstream oil and gas or midstream infrastructure funds. The oil and gas space has struggled mightily since fracking came online. So nobody in the oil and gas space predicted the effects of fracking and the increase in supply, in particular natural gas, and so those prices are down significantly, and consequently their stock prices are down significantly. The question of how to compare different strategies over different time frames is quite difficult. And so is 10 years a long enough period of time when it's been kind of a 10-year plus recovery, is arguable. I would prefer to see through market cycles. And even then, what's very difficult to do as an investment manager is to differentiate between luck and skill. You could have an investment manager who's had 20 years of plus performance and then has a year of horrific performance. And we saw that actually in 2008 when a number of mutual fund managers really suffered badly in the global financial crisis. So it's a good question, but the way we answer it is we seek diversification and we don't seek to predict the markets. I like to say to our trustees and our board, we are returns takers, not returns makers, essentially. So if we can do a little bit better at the total plan level, right? So we don't look to the individual line items so much as we look at the total plan level, then we're doing our job well. I don't know if these numbers are correct or not, but my boss says they are, so he likes to promote them. Oregon, relative to its peers, has had the top track record on the 1, 3, 10, and 20-year period. I think that's largely due to our asset allocation, not due to necessarily manager selection, but that performance has been pretty good.
Hi, I'm Brenda Leach. I asked a question earlier. I'm an MBA and M&M candidate. That actually raises a very interesting point that I think is different from the panelists we heard earlier. Working in asset classes that traditionally look at longer-term performance, how do you justify the way that you rate things with an industry and a movement that is ever-growing, extremely rapid, and we all recognize has a massive sense of urgency behind it in order to save the planet?
So, again, I think what we do is we tend to match the market. So we're not necessarily ahead of the market. We hope not to be too behind the market. So what I mean by match is, let's take renewable energy. We have investments with traditional power, but we also have investments with renewable energy. Renewable energy is something like 30% of the power fleet globally, and I think wind and solar is maybe in the mid-teens here in the States. So we're likely to have exposure in the mid-teens and global exposure in the 30s. We're not looking to get too far ahead of that. We have some examples of when people did and it didn't turn out very well. And so that would have been a fairly risky proposition for us to do. The good news is, as renewable energy increases, we're going to be matching that increase. So you'll see a growth in that exposure over time. That's one example.
We divested of all of our oil, gas, coal probably 5 or 6 years ago in our impact portfolios, and that's actually proven to be a very attractive thing from a financial perspective. What else coming down, so come up a little bit. So we've done that. We also benchmark all of our portfolios carbon footprints. So what we're seeking to do is drive down carbon emissions in the portfolio as much as we possibly can. I think our U.S. equity and global equity strategies are something like 80% more carbon efficient than the benchmark, like the Russell 3000, which is positive. But that's sort of on the forward-looking side of things. So those thematic verticals that we're investing, we try to look at sort of mega trends, macro trends, and then invest where we think is accretive from a financial perspective, but also where we can add the most impact in client portfolios. So that could be the future of work, or mobility, electric vehicles, electrification of grid, battery storage, any of that kind of stuff is, we think, just smart long-term investing. We're also afforded the ability to invest for like a very long time. Really, it's a patient capital approach. I think that's what's important.
Yeah, I'll just add, without giving a really crappy dissertation on portfolio theory, we're 100% equities right now. Our investors are young over virtually every time frame that's significant, and throughout market cycles, U.S. equities have performed extremely well. Yes, there have been periods of underperformance, but on rolling periods of someone's lifetime of investing in savings, so on the order of 30 to 50 years, high allocation to equities does extraordinarily well from a compounding perspective. So we're comfortable there on the equity side. When you look at sector returns over a long enough period of time too, they contribute pretty equally. GMO has a great paper on this. Even if oil and gas hadn't suffered mightily for the last decade, you don't really miss much not being in it. So who cares? It has suffered mightily, so if you haven't been in it, you've done pretty well. Yes, you can chalk that off to luck, to industry change that was unpredictable or hard to predict, etc. But let's not forget, right, fracking, which is largely responsible for a lot of the underperformance of oil and gas, recently was a political decision. It was something that laws changed to allow, that laws did not change to get rid of until recently, in some places in a small way, like in Colorado. So there are trends, themes that you'll hear people talk about, and sometimes those things are social movements, and sometimes those are the result of policy. And so there are lots of people who will make the argument that being invested more heavily in renewable energy at a certain point of time, that there is a policy tailwind behind it. There certainly has been in the last 10 years. When Barack Obama got into office, he passed a massive stimulus bill that put a huge amount of money behind renewable energy in the form of tax subsidies. Those still exist today. Republicans haven't been able to repeal them because they're too popular in Midwest states that have lots of wind, for instance. So, I haven't talked at all yet about Swell's take on performance versus the social or the impact side of the way that we invest, but we strongly believe that we can identify macro themes, boil that down to investable themes, and then put client money in that over the long term. Patient capital has at least even odds of market performance, and hopefully outperformance if we do it right. So, there's a lot of approaches to it, and I guess it takes all kinds.
So I think we have time for one more question.
Thanks so much. My name is Alex, and I'm a junior and also a member of the Bureau for Investment Group. And in the group, we also adapt a long-only and US-only strategy. And my question is about, so there's some of good investing opportunities that maybe has good potential financial returns, but might not very align with ESG or impact investing purpose. So how do you think about still invest in those companies, but engage in shareholder activism, like file a petition, vote on proxy, to make those companies that align with those good purposes and mitigate risk? Is that a like feasible way? Thank you.
Well, certainly at the Treasury, we've adopted a philosophy of engagement. And so rather than divestment, so that's one of the, so we're talking a little bit here about SRI and the exclusionary approach where you don't invest in a weapons company or a bail bonds company or a premium oil and gas company. And you sell in the public markets those positions. Those positions have to go to somebody. Somebody buys them. And so once you've sold, if you are a shareholder activist, you've lost your voice. So at Treasury, we've decided to hold and engage. Jenny Pete, who's one of my colleagues, sits on the Council of Institutional Investors, and they have a financial advocacy role with the SEC, FINRA, Congress, again, on these kinds of issues. When it comes to individual companies, they use the proxy voting process. And so their engagement can create some incremental improvement. We've seen that in kind of CEO compensation, management compensation in companies like Exxon and Shell. And you are seeing some movement using the shareholder methodology.
With all due respect, though, how well is that going with Exxon?
I don't know. So the answer is, I'm not at that level of detail. Again, I tend to not look at individual line item. You tend to look at a total portfolio. That seems to be the better approach in terms of measuring.
I'll just say, so one of my brilliant colleagues, she came to us about 8 months ago, joined our team. She was involved in Tesla, the shareholder resolution that resulted in Tesla finally releasing a sustainability report this year. So we don't currently have a product around shareholder engagement. However, it was a deliberate part of the design as well to have every individual own their own shares and not be put in funds so that they could vote their own proxies if they like. And we're currently working to build out functionality that makes that an intuitive and informed experience so that hopefully more of our customers will do that. They can join shareholder resolutions. This is a big growth area right now in sort of the fintech, asset management, impact investing space. There are a number of startups. There's Say, there's Your Say, I don't think it's Say name. And then there's the large institutional shareholder proxy voting firms who are now getting into this space, trying to build their own products around it, seeing sort of their business model be disrupted. So it's a very fertile space for any of you to focus on or try to get more experience in. There are lots of firms who need this expertise and people who focus on that. So it's a great question.
And there's been a change. If you go back maybe 10, 15 years ago, an institution like Oregon would have just let the investment manager who's managing those assets make that investment decision whether to approve the proxy slate or not. A lot of institutional investors like Oregon have really pulled that discretionary voting back in-house. They use consultants, but then they pick certain companies in particular to go after in a more concentrated fashion. And that may be glacial for some, but it is an improvement over the rest.
So just a quick comment on just all of these different investment philosophies. So what I'm hoping is what you've all taken away is just that there are a lot of different paths in terms of career paths to impact investing. And there's also a huge range of organizational types, right? So thinking about just the range of organizations represented here, the size of investments that are possible. So this is a vibrant field. So I'm going to just quickly, do a little bit of that impact measurement exercise. So if you raise your hand now if you are now thinking about a career in impact investing. Right, so I see, 4 or 5 hands more, so say maybe about a 20% increase, let's say, yeah. So just want to thank all the panelists. So thank you so much, John, Brad, and Jake. Thank you all for the I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, everyone, we're just going to, before we go out and enjoy their great beverages and food, we're just going to do a quick draw for the